Hello and welcome to Vantage This Week, a show where we recap the highlights of the week gone by. This week, Joe Biden grabbed global attention, not for his work, but because of his seemingly endless gaffes. He called Zelensky Putin and Kamala Harris Donald Trump. Is the US president single-handedly causing the biggest crisis in the history of the Democratic Party? Will he drop out of the presidential race? These questions come at a crucial time when NATO leaders met for a summit in Washington. At the same time, Russia hosted the Indian Prime Minister. Modi told Putin to stop the war. He got Russia's high civilian honor and told off the West. Meanwhile, in the India-China border conflict, there's a new provocation. India plans to build hydropower projects in Arunachal Pradesh, but China is protesting and vying for the control of key water bodies. In Africa, while Kenya is unable to quell public anger, President William Ruto has dismissed almost his entire cabinet. We'll tell you why. And we explained why the Earth's inner core is moving in reverse. All this and more lined up. Let's get started.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be Vice President, but I think she was not qualified to be President. I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
That's Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America, making daily headlines for his gaffes. The latest set came yesterday at an important press conference. Biden's team had billed it a big boy presser, where all concerns about the president's health should have been laid to rest. It was planned in the perfect setting. During the NATO summit, when all key allies of the US would be present and journalists from around the world would cover it. It was indeed a good opportunity, but Biden blew it again. He spoke for an hour, covered a lot of ground, from foreign policy to economy to politics to the election, but none of those things made news. What stood out were the president's blunders and the reactions of world leaders around him.
I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be Vice President, but I think she was not qualified to be President.
Their faces said it all. It's as if they were trapped in a nightmare, hoping for it to end. Biden's performance triggered a flood of bad press. Newspapers around the world have been talking about his gaffes. Look at some of the headlines. Toe-curling moment. Biden introduces Zelensky as Putin. Biden vows to complete the job despite stumbles. These are from British newspapers, and here's one from Italy. A flurry of gaffes, it says. Here's another one. Embarrassing moment at NATO summit. This is a Dutch newspaper. In Spain, Germany and Japan too, Biden's blunders were splashed across papers. Unfortunately for the president, it doesn't end here.
Is it well that on this occasion too, the president stumbled into some clamorous slip-ups?
When he spoke about his deputy Kamala Harris, he referred to her as a Vice President Trump. Passing the word to Zelensky, he made a mistake and instead said that he was passing the word to Putin. Well, in general, this just shows what state he is in at the moment.
This is a full-blown PR nightmare. Biden may insist that he's the best man for the job, but no one seems to believe him anymore. Least of all his party colleagues, the Democrats. They want him out. And if the president refuses to go himself, a mutiny is now a real possibility. Because more and more Democrats are coming out in public. They're asking Joe Biden to step aside. In the last 24 hours, 2 more Democrats have made this demand. And how many of them have said this publicly? At least 17 of them. 17 Democrats have openly called for Joe Biden to end his presidential campaign. These are members of the U.S. Congress in the lower house, better known as the House of Representatives. And reports say more Democrats could join this club in the days ahead. But so far, Biden remains defiant.
In your opening answer, you referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
Yesterday, reporters tried to grill the president. They asked him direct and pointed questions on his health, on his daily routine, and whether he can carry on for 4 more years. And this is how Biden responded.
Instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. I've taken 3 significant and intense neurological exams by a neurologist. I'm tested every single day about my neurological capacity to do decisions I make every day. And every single day I'm surrounded by good docs. If they think there's a problem, I promise you, or even if they don't think it's a problem, they think I should have a neurological exam again,
Joe Biden tried to mount a strong defense, but it doesn't make his situation better. And forget about the presidential bid for a moment. Look at his current official status. He is the sitting president of the United States of America, having to explain if he's getting enough sleep, having to share when he goes to bed, when he wakes up, what kind of neurological exams he takes or should take, what his medical reports say. He's being grilled about all of this. Would you vote for such a candidate? And while his age has been a point of concern for a while, his health became the biggest election issue after the debate. It was a disaster for the president. It completely derailed his campaign and crashed his popularity. He's trying very hard to recover, but honestly, it's now painful to watch. Not just for the Democrats, but for America's allies too. Take a look at this video from the NATO summit. That was Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni with the outgoing NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and the Finnish President Alexander Stubb. Reports say they were waiting for Joe Biden. The president was running late. Meloni seems a bit annoyed, rolling her eyes and pretending to look at her watch. Some others were more forgiving.
Of course, we can all have a slip of the tongue. I don't hide my preference. Certainly, as a president and a progressive, I prefer Biden as president of the United States. Slips of tongue happen, and if you always monitor everyone, you will find enough of them.
But this vote of assurance is not helping Joe Biden. The attacks continue both from his political and geopolitical rivals. Donald Trump, of course, was quick to attack. "Great job, Joe," he said on his social media platform Truth Social. And the Russians aren't holding back either.
I mean his statements regarding President Putin. This is unacceptable for us, and we don't think it in any way makes an American head of state look good.
Biden is now a source of international embarrassment, both for his party and his country. His re-election campaign is clearly imploding. But he's too stubborn to step aside. Either way, a Democratic victory now looks tough, with or without Joe Biden as the candidate.
Il fallait le faire.
It has all the makings of a high-pitched drama, a risky gamble, an embattled protagonist, plot twists, and an unexpected climax. On Sunday, France woke up to the results of its parliamentary elections. And needless to say, it was a shocker. Newspapers were ready to print a win for the far right. Instead, it's the left that got the first place. So while Emmanuel Macron is still the president, France has got a new parliament and their political landscape has transformed significantly. Now, quick primer first. In June, the European Parliament held its elections. The French far right made huge gains there. It left the French president uneasy. So President Emmanuel Macron saw it as a blow. He dissolved the parliament. He called for elections. In the first round, the far right came on top. But no party had a majority, so they had to go for a second round. That happened yesterday. The far right was expected to make more gains, but they ended up coming third. The maximum number of seats went to the left, and in second place were Macron's centrists.
Our opponents seem to be thinking they have already won, but there was this real upsurge throughout the country, which still shows that there are forces that are able to mobilize. The turnout increased, and so we won. It is a very good thing.
Relieved. Terribly relieved. I tell myself the French people have responded. We couldn't let the national rally win. This is not France. This is not the France of enlightenment. It's not the France of liberty, equality, fraternity.
So how did it happen? And what does this result mean for France? Let's look at the top 5 highlights. Number 1, it's a huge victory for the left. They were fighting under the new Popular Front. The left parties had come together as the Popular Front. It's a coalition of 4 main parties: the France Unbowed Movement, the Socialists, the Greens, and the Communists. It's quite a diverse bunch. Now, these parties do not have a lot in common. They differ in ideologies. They've had disagreements. But this time they came together to keep Marine Le Pen's national rally out of government.
This evening, the national rally is far from having the absolute majority the commentators predicted scarcely a week ago. In fact, it's totally the opposite. It's an immense relief for an overwhelming majority of people in our country.
Which brings us to highlight number 2. Who will become the Prime Minister? Usually the president names a prime minister from the biggest faction. In this case, the biggest faction is the new Popular Front, that is the leftists. The alliance says it will put forward a candidate by next week. But it won't be without disagreements. Currently, a lot of names are doing the rounds, but one of them stands out, and that is Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He heads the far left, France Unbowed. He is a well-known figure in French politics, but if there's one thing that he is not known for, it is compromises. He is a divisive figure. And for a coalition to function smoothly, you need consensus, not division. Other names in the race include Marine Tondelier from the Green Party, the Socialist Party's current head, Olivier Faure, and the Communist Fabien Roussel. Another unlikely contender is François Hollande, the former French president. So there's no consensus on who the prime ministerial candidate will be, and France is in a political mess. That's highlight number 3. France is staring at a hung parliament. The left may have won, but they do not have majority. France's National Assembly has 577 seats. No group, no alliance has got 200 seats. The left-wing coalition has 187 seats. Macron's Ensemble Alliance have 159 seats. And the far-right National Rally and its allies have 142 seats. So no one has enough seats to govern. If the parties cannot cobble up a majority, there will be chaos. We saw some of it on Sunday. There were clashes on the streets. If a government is not formed soon, it could get worse. Highlight number 4. What happens to the far right? The National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party, they'd won the first round. They expected to win this one too, but that did not happen. Party President Jordan Bardella slammed the results. He condemned what he called the unnatural alliance.
By deciding to deliberately paralyze our institutions, Emmanuel Macron has not pushed the country towards uncertainty and instability. As a result, he has deprived the French people of any response to their day-to-day difficulties for many months to come.
It's not game over for Marine Le Pen's party, though. In the last parliament, they had 88 seats. This time, they have 140 seats. So the party has made significant gains. They may still be out of power, but they're much stronger now with 140 seats. And this result could set the tone for the next presidential election, even though it's slated for 2027.
We're losing one more year of unregulated immigration, one more year of losing purchasing power, one more year of a blowing up of insecurity in our country. But if we need to go through that, then we'll go through that.
This brings us to the man responsible for the mess, Emmanuel Macron. That's highlight number 5. Macron took a gamble when he announced the polls. It was a snap election, remember? Until last week, it looked like it had backfired badly. But the president has now made a comeback. His party, the centrists, are in second place. the far right are out of power. So Macron may not have won, but he hasn't lost as much as was feared. And the road ahead will be tough for him. Macron, like I said, remains president of France. But with the parliament as divided as this, there will be political deadlock. And all eyes are on the president. He cast the die that led to this mess. So now he must clean it up. The last 24 hours have been quite eventful. Prime Minister Modi and President Putin have met twice, first for dinner on Monday and then today for the annual India-Russia summit. They reviewed the entire spectrum of the bilateral relationship, from the war in Ukraine to defense, trade and energy. All of it was discussed. They resolved some pressing issues, and the visit ended on a high for the Indian Prime Minister. He was honored with Russia's highest civilian award, the Order of St. Andrew the Apostle. He was awarded for his contributions to the India-Russia relationship. In fact, the award was announced in 2019, but the ceremony could not happen then because Prime Minister Modi had to postpone his visit. So he was formally given the honor today. Russia has conferred the same award on Xi Jinping as well. The Chinese president received it in 2017. 2 years later, Moscow honored Prime Minister Modi. And by doing this, Putin is sending an important message that his relationship with India is as important as his ties with China. And the West has been watching these developments closely, not without sharp reactions. Tonight, we'll tell you all about it. The day began with formal engagements, the India-Russia delegation-level talks, co-chaired by Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. The tone for today's summit was set last evening when Putin hosted Modi for dinner. This was an informal meeting, the dinner meeting, at the Russian president estate outside Moscow. And the chemistry between the two leaders was evident. President Putin welcomed Prime Minister Modi with a hug.
Hello.
There were several such moments. The Russian president took the Indian Prime Minister on a tour of his dacha or estate, and they were seen riding a golf cart together. Putin even introduced Modi to his pet horses. Social media was full of memes comparing this reception to the long table treatment that Western leaders get in Moscow of late. Evidently, the Russian leader attaches great significance to his relationship with India, and this was abundantly clear when both leaders sat down for discussions.
आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, परम दोस्त, आपका स्वागत है, हार्दिक स्वागत है। आपको देखने से मुझे बड़ी खुशी है।
Официальные разговоры у нас состоятся завтра.
औपचारिक बातचीत कल होने वाली है।
А сегодня мы можем в такой домашней обстановке спокойно поговорить, наверное, о тех же вопросах, но неофициально. Но вначале хотел бы вас поздравить с переизбранием на должность премьер-министра. У вас свои идеи, вы очень энергичный человек, вы умеете добиваться результатов в интересах Индии и индийского народа.
तरह के घराना वो अपने आप में एक बहुत बड़ा खुशी का अवसर होता है और मुझे आपने अपने घर पर निमंत्रित किया और आज की शाम हम साथ में गप्पे मारे, इसलिए आपने तय किया। इस कार्यक्रम की रचना के लिए और मुझे घर पे बुलाने के लिए मैं आपका बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ।
After this exchange, Modi and Putin were left alone with their translators for a freewheeling chat. They discussed important issues like the war in Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi told President Putin a solution will not be found on the battlefield. And this is a very significant statement. It is a direct appeal from India to end the war in Ukraine. It is also in line with what Modi told Putin back in 2022 when they'd met in Uzbekistan on the sidelines of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. That's when Modi told Putin, and I'm quoting, "This is not the era of war." And yesterday, he urged the Russian leader to explore diplomatic options. The same message was reiterated during the formal summit today as well.
एक्सेलेंसी, एक मित्र के नाते मैंने हमेशा कहा है कि हमारी भावी पीढ़ी के उज्जवल भविष्य के लिए शांति सर्वाधिक आवश्यक है। लेकिन मैं ये भी जानता हूं कि युद्ध के मैदान में समाधान संभव नहीं होते। बम, बंदूक और गोलियों के बीच समाधान और शांति वार्ताएं सफल नहीं होती हैं और हमने वार्ता के माध्यम से ही शांति के रास्ते अपनाने होंगे।
So India is pushing for peace and talks. India is also clear that these talks must include Russia, which explains why New Delhi did not endorse the Swiss declaration last month. I'm referring to the Ukraine Peace Summit. Switzerland had hosted it in June. More than 90 countries participated in the summit. India too sent a representative. But Russia was not invited to this summit in Switzerland. So India refused to sign the joint communique. It said that there can be no meaningful and sustainable resolution without Moscow's presence. This was India's message to the West. At the same time, it is asking Russia to abide by the United Nations Charter, to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Prime Minister Modi addressed this with President Putin, and that's the biggest highlight of this visit. He also raised the issue of the repatriation of Indian citizens, those serving in Russian forces. Reports say there are at least 40 such Indians stuck in Russia. They were tricked by agents into joining the Russian forces. And India has been trying to secure their release. Yesterday, there was a breakthrough. President Putin agreed to discharge all Indian citizens. There were agreements on some other key issues as well, like on trade, where both countries have set an ambitious target. Bilateral trade currently stands at $65 billion. They want to raise it all the way up to $100 billion by 2030. And this trade relationship is heavily skewed in Russia's favor, mainly due to India's oil purchases. We buy a lot of oil from Russia. To fix this imbalance, India has sought greater market access from Russia. On the defense front, India had a specific concern. We talked about this yesterday. The delay in deliveries. Many Russian supplies are running late. They're yet to deliver 2 S-400 missile defense systems. Prime Minister Modi is believed to have raised this, asking for speedy deliveries. India is also investing more in its partnership with Russia. Today, the Prime Minister made an announcement that India will open 2 more consulates in Russia, in Kazan and Yekaterinburg. So overall, it was a productive visit for Prime Minister Modi. India managed to secure its strategic interests with a vital partner. India also asserted its strategic autonomy and asked for an end to the war. But not everyone is thrilled about this visit. Like the United States, which is reacting on expected lines, yesterday it said that it was concerned about Prime Minister Modi's engagements with Russia.
There's another visitor in Moscow today, Prime Minister Modi of India. Obviously India has a long-standing relationship with Russia. What do you think of the timing of this right before the NATO summit and in light of what's going on?
We would urge India, as we do any country when it engages with Russia. India is a strategic partner with whom we engage in a full and frank dialogue, and that includes on our concerns about their relationship with Russia.
Ukraine's President Zelensky added to this. He called Putin a quote-unquote criminal. He said Prime Minister Modi's engagements undermine the peace efforts for Ukraine. In a statement, Zelensky referred to yesterday's airstrikes on Kiev, where a children's hospital was hit. But both the US and Ukraine spoke too soon. They should have waited for the Indian Prime Minister to speak, because he too raised yesterday's airstrikes with Putin.
में विश्वास करने वाला हर व्यक्ति जब जानहानि होती है तब बहुत पीड़ित होता है, लेकिन उसमें भी जब मासूम बच्चों की कत्ल होती है, मासूम बच्चों को मरते हुए देखते हैं, तब हृदय छलनी हो जाता है और वो दर्द बहुत भयानक होता है। और इस विषय में भी आपसे विस्तार से चर्चा हुई।
Now that's a strong message. Clearly, India is advocating for the protection of civilians in Ukraine, especially the children. Prime Minister Modi is probably the first world leader to take up yesterday's attack directly with the Russian president. He also tackled another tricky issue, India's oil purchases from Russia. Prime Minister Modi countered the Western criticism of these purchases.
दुनिया के अनेक देशों के नागरिकों को पेट्रोल डीजल के कारण बहुत बड़े संकट से गुजरना पड़ा और आज भी गुजरना पड़ रहा है, लेकिन हमारे उस कारोबार के कारण हम भारत के नागरिकों को पेट्रोल डीजल के इस मार से बचा पाए, इन्फ्लेशन से बचा पाए और स्टेबिलिटी भी ला पाए। इसके लिए भी मैं आपका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं।
In diplomacy, the choice of words is everything. Prime Minister Modi's statements demonstrate how skillfully India balances its ties between Russia and the West. It's a tough balance to maintain, but India must do it to protect its national interest, and so far New Delhi has done it well. While the NATO summit takes place in Washington, another meeting is taking place in Europe, in one of the few non-NATO countries there. That's Austria. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in Vienna today. He dropped by after his Russia visit and he was given a grand welcome. You saw the Austrian artists singing their rendition of Vande Mataram. For our non-Indian viewers, Vande Mataram is a verse associated with India's independence struggle. Today, it's a patriotic song, making the Austrian rendition a heartfelt gesture. The Indian Prime Minister lauded this performance. He put this post on social media, praising Austria's vibrant musical culture. Of course, Modi wasn't in Vienna just for the music. There was much more on the agenda. After all, this is a rare trip. India and Austria are celebrating 75 years of diplomatic relations, and that is a long time. But state visits between the two countries are rare. It has been 41 years since an Indian Prime Minister visited Austria. The last visit was in 1983 by Indira Gandhi. That's how long it's been. So there was a lot to catch up on and a lot of new opportunities to explore. Yesterday was for catching up. Prime Minister Modi landed in the afternoon. He was greeted by the Austrian Foreign Minister, who is also Austria's former Chancellor, their equivalent of a Prime Minister. Modi spent yesterday meeting and greeting various people like the Indian diaspora in Vienna and the current Austrian Chancellor, Karl Nehammer. The two leaders, the two heads of state, had dinner and then took some selfies as well. It was around this time that Modi saw the Austrian artists perform Vande Mataram. So that was what took place yesterday, the catching up part. Today was about getting down to business. Prime Minister Modi arrived at Austria's Federal Chancellery. It's effectively their Prime Minister's office. He was given a ceremonial guard of honor when he arrived. Take a look at this. After that, the Indian Prime Minister signed the guest book at the Chancellery and then he got down to business. Prime Minister Modi and Austrian Chancellor Nehammer held bilateral talks. It was a delegation-level bilateral, and a host of issues were taken up, like trade and investment.
Today, there are excellent economic and trade relations with India, marked by mutual trust and confidence. 2.7 billion euros is the current trade volume. More than 150 Austrian businesses are operating in India, and we expect the number to increase. There will also be Indian investments in Austria.
दोनों देशों की युवा शक्ति और आइडियाज को कनेक्ट करने के लिए स्टार्टअप ब्रिज को गति दी जाएगी। मोबिलिटी और माइग्रेशन पार्टनरशिप पर पहले से समझौता हुआ है। यह लीगल माइग्रेशन और स्किल्ड वर्कफोर्स की मूवमेंट में सहयोग देगा। सांस्कृतिक और शैक्षणिक संस्थाओं के बीच आदान प्रदान को बढ़ावा दिया जाएगा।
That's a lot to unpack, but let's look at the key points. More Austrian businesses are expected to open shop in India. Cooperation between Indian and Austrian startups is expected. An agreement on legal migration has already been reached, and this could help the movement of skilled workers. Those were some of the key points discussed at the bilateral. After this, Prime Minister Modi took part in a business summit. 40 businesses took part. They were from both India and Austria. Hopefully, this translates into more cooperation and partnerships. So that was the major focus of this summit, increasing economic cooperation. And India seems to be on the right track here. Let's see how this plays out in the months to come. We begin tonight with the India-China border conflict. There's a new provocation from the Chinese side over Arunachal Pradesh, the northeastern Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh that China claims as its own and calls South Tibet. Now it is broadening its bogus claims and extending them to water bodies. That's what the latest row is about. China is vying for the control of key water bodies. It began with some new news reports about India's developmental projects. India plans to build 12 power stations in Arunachal Pradesh. These will be hydropower projects. They'll use water from rivers to generate electricity. New Delhi has cleared the plan. With a budget of about $1 billion, the money has been set aside, and the plan is likely to be announced later this month in the budget speech, scheduled for the 23rd of this month, 23rd of July, the first union budget of the Modi government's third term. It will be presented by India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. That's where the hydropower projects in Arunachal Pradesh are expected to be announced. It's a good plan with clear benefits. The domestic demand for electricity is rising in India, and the current sources of power are insufficient. So hydropower could help bridge the gap. Plus, there's scope to expand in this direction. In the last financial year, hydropower accounted for less than 10% in India's overall power output. So there is room to do more. The new plants will contribute to the development of Arunachal Pradesh. The cost will be covered by New Delhi, and the state will get electricity. So it's a win-win. But China has a problem. It is objecting to India's plans. Beijing issued a statement today. It said India has no right to build these hydropower plants. The statement said, and I quote, South Tibet is China's territory. Like I said, Beijing claims Arunachal Pradesh as part of China and calls it South Tibet. Now, no one agrees with this. There is no international recognition or support for China's claim. There is no legal or historical basis. But China keeps bringing it up to provoke India. So what should India do? Go ahead with the plan. India has every right to set up this project. It's inside Indian territory, funded with Indian money, and for the benefit of Indians. So China has no say in the matter. The problem is Beijing is going beyond statements. It is trying to establish an alternative reality and leverage geography to put pressure on India. Now, one part of this sinister plan involves rivers in the region, specifically the Brahmaputra River. Among the largest in the world, China calls it the Yarlung Sangbo. That's their name for the Brahmaputra. The river originates in Tibet, a region controlled by China, and then it flows through two countries, India and Bangladesh. The state of Arunachal Pradesh falls on the river's path. It flows through the northern part of the state, and the Brahmaputra is an important river for the region. More than 130 million people depend on it, their lives and livelihoods. And China wants to control and leverage the Brahmaputra by building a dam. The project was announced a few years ago, a super hydropower dam. It will be built in Tibet on a section of the Brahmaputra. Reports say that this dam would have more capacity than the Three Gorges Dam. The Three Gorges Dam is the biggest dam in China. It is the world's largest hydropower facility, built on the Yangtze River. So the dam in Tibet is expected to be bigger than that. Now, India had lodged a protest against this project, but China has not changed its mind. Today, it has expressed outrage over India's planned projects. They could act as spoilers for China's project in Tibet, which makes it all the more crucial, not just for India's energy security, but also for its sovereignty. In recent months, China has challenged India on multiple occasions. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Modi had visited Arunachal Pradesh, and Beijing had protested the visit.
The China-India border issue remains unresolved, and India has no right to unilaterally develop the Chinese southern Tibet region. India's related actions will only complicate the border issue and negatively impact the situation in the border areas of the two countries.
Then Beijing released a new list of Chinese names for territories in Arunachal Pradesh. Since 2017, China has released 4 such lists and given Chinese names to almost 100 Indian territories, all in Arunachal Pradesh, and now it is going after power projects and Indian rivers. It is time for New Delhi to draw a line. It should push back harder against China's bogus claims. Now let's turn our attention to Africa, to Kenya in the east, where President William Ruto has just taken another step. He addressed the country and made this announcement.
Recent events that necessitated the withdrawal of the finance bill, which will require a review and reorganization of our budget and fiscal management, have brought us to an inflection point. I have today, in line with the powers given to me by Article 1521 and 1525B of the Constitution and Sections 12 of the Office of the Attorney General's Act, decided to dismiss with immediate effect all the Cabinet Secretaries and Attorney General of the Republic of Kenya, of the Cabinet of Kenya, except the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs. And of course, the Office of the Deputy President is not affected in any way.
Ruto has dismissed almost his entire cabinet. This is his latest move to try and quell public anger, which has exploded over the last few weeks, leaving his grip on power tenuous. People began protesting a few weeks ago in the run-up to the annual budget. Kenya's Finance Bill 2024, President William Ruto tried to raise taxes. He wanted to hike taxes on basic goods like bread. And Ruto's reason was simple. Kenya had a high amount of public debt. The government needed more money to pay this off, to service the debt. And Ruto wanted to get this money from ordinary people. Now, on the one hand, every country must pay what it owes, and the people need to contribute to state coffers. That was Ruto's thinking too. But the people weren't having it, because he was partly responsible for the debt crisis. That's how they see it. Ruto was Kenya's deputy president during the previous administration, the administration that took all the loans. So Kenya sunk deeper and deeper into debt on Ruto's watch. He was still elected as president, though, after promising to improve the situation. And since he took charge, he has tried. But his solution has always been to raise taxes. It's been 2 years now, and now the Kenyan people were fed up. That is why the latest tax proposals led to public outrage. And they have snowballed into a new movement, a movement to oust Ruto's government. At every protest, you will hear the chant saying Ruto must go. The Kenyan president knows this. He understands that the public sentiment is turning against him, which is why he keeps taking new steps to quell public anger. First, he decided to scrap his own budget, the finance bill. He scrapped it. Then he tried engaging with the protesters. He hosted an event on social media platform X. He spoke to young Kenyans, the demographic that is leading the protest. He addressed them directly, but that did not work either. Last week, Ruto announced austerity measures. He said that instead of raising taxes, he would cut government spending across the board and his own office as well. He ordered a freeze in pay rises for his cabinet. That didn't work either, because he's now decided to get rid of the cabinet altogether. But you can see the pattern. Every few days, President Ruto is trying something new, hoping that something works and the people of Kenya settle down. But it seems the people have another idea. They're gathering signatures to exercise a recall power. A rule was put forward in 2010. If 30% of a constituency's voters make an appeal, the sitting MP can be recalled. This power has not been used in Kenya in the past. It has never been used before, but the protesters want to try it this time. One constituency already has about half the required signatures.
I'm hoping that Kabete will be able to inspire the rest of the country to take action. Because sincerely, if we don't put these people on check, then that is it. It's the end of Kenya.
Will the Kenyan public manage to put its MPs in check? Will they manage to oust President Ruto? We'll be tracking this closely. Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore are still stuck in space. They're both NASA astronauts. They were launched into the orbit on the 5th of June in Boeing's Starliner capsule. The astronauts were scheduled to stay there for a week, but it's been more than a month now and they're still there, stuck in space. What's worse, there is no confirmation on when they can return. There is no talk of a rescue mission. In fact, the agency seemed to be in denial mode. NASA and Boeing refused to accept that the astronauts are stranded. Here's a report.
June 5th, that's when two NASA astronauts were launched into space. Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore. They travelled to the International Space Station to complete a test flight of the Starliner capsule, which is a Boeing aircraft. The journey took 25 hours. The trip was completed successfully.
Lots of cheering here in the room, big hugs.
Williams and Wilmore reached the International Space Station. The astronauts were scheduled to stay there for a week. But that 1 week turned into 2. And soon it turned into more than a month. The astronauts are still stranded in space. But apparently that's the wrong term to use here, at least according to NASA. The space agency, along with Boeing, held a press conference recently. They addressed questions about the delayed Starliner mission, and instead of giving honest answers, they chose to issue a strong rebuttal. The NASA program manager overseeing the mission said, "I want to make it very clear that Butch and Suni are not stranded in space. Our plan is to continue to return them on Starliner and return them home." That's well and good, but guess he forgot to add eventually to that sentence, because the astronauts are still stuck in space. With each passing day, it sounds like the plot of a scary Hollywood movie. Instead, NASA chooses to fight over the semantics. And what's more, there's no time frame for the return. There's no talk of a rescue mission. And the vague answers don't provide much clarity about what's going on or how severe the situation is. This is what we know so far. The Starliner has 28 jets. During the journey, 5 of them, quote-unquote, behaved oddly. NASA and Boeing engineers are still studying the thrusters. They say that 4 out of 5 are working properly now. The other will not be used during the trip home. But they still don't fully understand what caused the problem. So they're still running a bunch of tests and analysis. None of this sounds very encouraging. But NASA and Boeing say that the Starliner is fully capable of bringing the astronauts home in case of an emergency. They claim to only be keeping the Starliner in space to better analyze what went wrong. And how long is that analysis expected to last? Well, they aren't sure. But soon they may have to work on borrowed time. The Starliner capsule has a limited battery. It can only spend 45 days in space. This is how long it was certified by NASA to last in the orbit. But now, NASA is hinting that the mission will last longer. They plan to certify it for an additional 45 days. Clearly, NASA and Boeing want to buy more time. Despite what they say, this does not inspire confidence. And in spite of their repeated explanations, we don't know if at this very moment the Starliner is safe to bring the crew home. We're still waiting for NASA to provide an answer.
For our next story, let's talk about what goes on at the heart of the Earth. I'm talking about the Earth's inner core. It is a huge metal ball. It is made up mainly of iron and it gets hot, anywhere between 5,000 to 6,000 degrees Celsius. What makes this core fascinating is that it spins. Think of it as one spinning top, that is the core, inside another bigger spinning top, that is the Earth. But the two do not spin together. In fact, according to a recent study, the Earth's inner core is spinning in reverse. What does this mean for us? Here's a report.
The Earth seems to have had a change of heart. We're talking about the Earth's core, the innermost part of the planet. Its spin has changed dramatically in recent years. According to a recent study, the Earth's inner core temporarily stopped rotating and then changed its direction. It's now going in reverse. This might sound bizarre and it invites a number of questions. Does this mean the Earth is also going in reverse? Is this apocalyptic? Well, not at all. But before we explain what this means for us, let's go back to Science 101. The Earth is made up of a lot of layers, and it's a volatile planet. The topmost layer is the crust. It's ever shifting. Then we have the mantle. This is where behemoth masses of rock flow. Go deeper and you will reach the core. This has two levels. The outer core, which is liquid, it holds molten metals that create currents. They conjure the Earth's magnetic field. So this layer is important. Go even deeper and you will find the inner core. This is a solid metal ball. About 70% as wide as the moon, and it rotates much like our planet. But here's the catch. The inner core rotates independently of our spinning planet, kind of like a spinning top inside an even bigger spinning top. And the two don't always cooperate. The Earth spins roughly 360 degrees in a day. That's how it completes a single day. But the inner core rotates about 1 degree faster than the Earth every year. So this causes time differences. Of course, 1 degree per year is not a lot. It's imperceptible to Earthlings, but scientists can track and measure the difference. When the core spins slowly, the liquid around it speeds up, so the Earth rotates faster. This shortens the length of a day, but the changes translate to merely thousandths of a second in a day. That may sound anticlimactic, but it's intriguing to researchers, especially since the inner core is a relatively newfound discovery. It was discovered by Danish seismologist Inge Lehmann in 1936. The question remains, why is the core going in reverse? Scientists are not sure, but according to the study, this could be part of a 70-year-long cycle of the core's movements, which sees changes due to the magnetic field. So the reversal in the spin can be part of the core's nature. Even though the core is at the heart of much of what happens on Earth, from volcanic eruptions to earthquakes, we don't know much about it. It is the Earth's deep interior, so it's impossible to observe or sample directly. While there are still several unanswered questions, this study does bring us one step closer to understanding the center of the Earth.
Do you think that time travel is possible? You may say no, but what if we told you that there are scientists who are planning to make it happen? They want to transport people to a distant future and thousands of participants are willing. But they will not zoom through black holes. They will not travel in spaceships or fancy cars. They will be frozen. The concept is called cryonics, where a person's body is frozen in the hope that a future civilization will reanimate it. That is the eventual aim, that one day the frozen body will be rewarmed and revived, kind of like a less gross version of mummification, with the expectation that the mummy will come back to life. Now, in day-to-day medicine, freezing is already a useful technique, albeit on a smaller scale. Doctors freeze blood cells, bone marrow, sperm, and embryos. But freezing a human body, that's another ballgame. Cryonics can begin only after a person is clinically and legally dead. You cannot start freezing before that. You have to die. After death, the procedure needs to happen quickly. First, dry ice is used to keep the body at a lower temperature, so the body can be moved to a storage facility. And once that happens, the body is put in a chamber. It is infused with chemicals. The temperature is slowly lowered further below minus 130 degrees Celsius. This cold allows the cells to survive and the body is preserved.
Much like people in a long-term coma, except there's no metabolism. So to them, no time is passing. So people say, well, if they're not alive, they must be dead. Well, no, there's kind of an in-between state, which is not really alive or dead. By kind of a crude analogy, you have daytime and you have nighttime, but you also have twilight in between because they kind of shade into one another. So in our view, dying is a process, and cryonics stops that process. It puts dying on a pause and lets you go into the future where we have greater capabilities to reverse that and bring you back to life.
It sounds like science fiction, being frozen in time, then reawakening. If successful, this would be a massive breakthrough. But it's a very big if. Even the scientific community is skeptical. Cryonics is generally viewed as a pseudoscience. In other words, quackery. While it promises to defy death, there is no proof, there is no evidence that cryonics can revive people, absolutely no guarantee or precedent.
The only group that you really see getting excited about the possibility are people who are people who specialize in studying the distant future, or people who have a stake in wanting you to pay the money to do it. I don't really see any mainstream brain scientists, physiologists, people from psychiatry who study the mind. They're not lining up saying, I think this is a sound idea. Moreover, I don't think any of them do it.
But this has not discouraged the enthusiasts, men of science, tech moguls like Jeff Bezos, Sam Altman, Larry Page included. They've pledged hundreds of millions of dollars towards this cause. 500 people have frozen their bodies already. They're now stored in vats around the world, mostly in the US. 500 people have already done it. More than 5,000 people want to follow suit. They've signed up to be frozen. Usually the takers are uber wealthy, which should not be surprising. Regular people have the real life to worry about, not the afterlife. So also the procedure costs upwards of $200,000. The rates are lower if you just want to freeze your brain inside your severed head. That happens too. Clearly, buying islands, building rockets, and planning a trip to Mars is not enough. So the wealthy are not only freezing their bodies, they're also freezing their assets. They're creating a revival trust. It is like a trust fund, except it will not be passed down generations. It will be created by and for the frozen dead. It will be saved for when they come back to life. Basically, if you're crazy rich, then your money can be immortal too. But there's a slight problem. This immortality depends on a tower of assumptions and a lot of questions. Are you alive if your body is cryonically preserved? If you are revived, are you the same person? In the eyes of the law, no. You cannot reverse a death certificate, not yet. Also, we don't know if the bodies are being frozen successfully. So far, the freezing services are crude. Soon after death, parts of the brain stop working. So imagine waking up 100 years later, if you do wake up, only to be a shell without a working brain. Kind of like a cognitive vegetable. I'm still not clear how this works, and cryonics does not have the answers, but it promises to never say never. At best, the concept comes through. At worst, we have a bunch of white walkers living amongst us.